told me that one day, I'd get a call from Child Protective Services saying my son had been left at their office, with no one coming back for him. I probably would have laughed it off, thinking that could never happen to my family. My name is Sophie, 31 years old, an emergency room nurse used to every kind of crisis, but nothing could have prepared me for that helpless feeling when I heard the cold voice on the phone. "We found your son, Mark. He was left here with no relatives around." Every bit of trust I had ever placed in my parents, the people I once thought were the perfect grandparents to Mark, shattered into pieces. In that moment, it felt like my entire world collapsed around me. If it were you, what would you do if your own parents, the people you trusted most, abandoned your child with strangers and disappeared to some distant paradise? Let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe because this is a story I never imagined I would have to tell. I grew up in a family that, from the outside, looked perfect. My father was a successful accountant, always beaming with pride about his children at family gatherings, and my mother had once been an elementary school principal, a woman respected by the whole town for her polished appearance and dedication to children. We lived in a quiet two-story house in the suburbs where everyone said our family represented traditional American values: hard work, achievement, unity, and above all, love. But behind those family photos, everyone smiling in the living room, there was always a distance that no one ever named. I'm the youngest daughter, Sophie, a single mom, working and raising my 9-year-old son Mark on my own. Since Mark was born, I've had to learn how to juggle everything by myself. Endless night shifts at the hospital, Sundays spent holding my son while scrambling to finish paperwork for my morning shift. Everything I did for Mark. To me, my son is my whole world. The reason I never allowed myself to break down, no matter how tired I was. There are 4 people in my family: my dad, my mom, me, and Linda, my sister 6 years older than me. Linda has always been my parents' pride and joy, excelling at school, going to a prestigious university, then getting married and having 2 clever, lively children, Jack, 12, and Emily, 8. If you've ever sat in our living room on Thanksgiving, you'd easily notice the radiant look on my mother's face when she talked about Jack's statewide basketball trophy, or my father praising Emily's ballet skills as if she were a real artist. Stories about Linda and her kids were always colorful and full of excitement, while I would just sit beside them, listening and smiling, then turning to comfort Mark when he quietly asked, "Why don't Grandma and Grandpa ever ask what I'm learning at school?" Maybe I've just gotten used to being the extra, the second choice in my own home. I remember clearly when Mark started first grade, he drew a picture of our family and excitedly showed it to Grandma. She just smiled and said, "That's nice," then hurried off to the kitchen to check if Jack's favorite dish was ready. On birthdays, Mark would get a small gift while Jack and Emily got piles of big boxes, surrounded by everyone's cheers, hugs, and kisses. There was even a time when Mark was very sick, and I asked my mom if she could help watch him for a few days so I could go to work. But when I came home, she told me she'd just taken Jack to basketball practice, and Mark stayed home by himself. My son, though, he's so well-behaved and always tries to fit in, still feels like an outsider in his own mother's family. Those small things, day after day, have turned into a wound inside me that never seems to heal. I keep asking myself what I've done wrong to always live with this feeling of not enough, while my sister and her kids are always favored, always held up as proof of our family's success and happiness. I don't want Mark to grow up feeling that way, so I always teach him to believe in himself, to be kind, and never let loneliness make him feel small. Sometimes I try to convince myself that maybe my parents just aren't good at showing their feelings, that maybe things will change when Mark gets older. But the more time passes, the clearer and more painful the difference becomes. My parents are still polite and kind to me, still check in when needed, but they always prioritize Linda and her kids in everything, from meals to outings, even to the small talk at the dinner table. Mark has started to notice it too, even though he doesn't say much. He just quietly watches everyone, then turns away to play by himself. I kept trying to maintain the peace, hiding my own hurt so that Mark wouldn't be affected by it. There were nights, after my son had fallen asleep, when I would just sit quietly in my room, looking at the yellow light shining through the window and wonder, should I let go of the hope for a complete family, or should I keep enduring, waiting for some miracle that would make my parents realize Mark deserves to be loved just like any other child? I always chose to be patient because I believed that, no matter what, my parents were still family. Still Mark's grandparents. The only ones I wanted to give my son more love, more beautiful memories in his childhood. But I never expected that this very trust would be the reason everything in my life and Mark's changed forever. At March, the city where I worked was suddenly placed under a red alert due to a widespread flu outbreak. The hospital was desperately understaffed, shifts packed one after another, and, as always, I had to put the needs of the community above my own wishes. When the head nurse texted me, "Sophie, we need you urgently. Can you take extra shifts out of town for the next 3 days?" I looked at Mark. He was folding paper airplanes in the living room at the time, and my heart ached. Normally, I would have refused like all the times before, but this time, I knew I had no other choice. I sat down next to my son and held his hand tightly. "Mark, I have to go to work out of town for a few days. Can you stay with Grandma and Grandpa? I know you like being at their house. This time, it'll be like a fun vacation." Mark's eyes lit up and he jumped up excitedly, asking, "Will Jack and Emily be there too, Mom? Will Grandma and Grandpa take us to the park like last time?" I smiled, doing my best to hide my exhaustion and worries. Maybe this was a chance for Mark to really feel his grandparents' love, and for me to rebuild that bridge with my family after so many years of nothing but short phone calls and dinners filled with other people's laughter. I prepared everything thoroughly: clean clothes, allergy medicine, Mark's favorite body wash, even a small journal for him to record his days at Grandma's house. I ordered a box of his favorite brownies and texted my mom. "Mark's a bit sensitive to pollen, Mom. Please don't let him play in the garden in the afternoon." My dad replied calmly, "Don't worry about work, we'll take care of him." Linda sent a rushed message. "I'm busy too, Sophie, don't forget to call and check on Mark every day." I reassured myself that this time, things would be different. Mark was older, knew how to take care of himself, how to find joy, and, above all, I believed my parents would pay attention to the little details I so carefully left for them. That morning, I brought Mark to my parents' house, reminding him of everything, hugging him for a long time. Mark wrapped his arms around my neck, beaming. "Have a good trip, Mom. I'll tell you everything when you get back." Grandma and Grandpa promised to take me swimming with Jack. I stood at the door, watching Mark run into the living room, his footsteps mixing with the sound of Emily and Jack showing off their new game to Grandpa. Is there any moment more beautiful for a mother than seeing her child eagerly step into what should be a second home? A place to receive all the love their childhood deserves? On the way to the hospital, I tried to shake off the doubts, the lingering sadness over old favoritism. I told myself, this was the time to trust. All worries melted into the rhythm of the car, leaving me with only hope. Hope that Mark would make beautiful new memories, that his grandparents would find joy and affection in him like they did with Jack and Emily, and that I, even as a single mother, would finally be recognized as a real part of this family. The first night away from my son, I texted to check in. "Did you sleep well, Mark? Did Grandma and Grandpa tell you a bedtime story?" After sending the message, I stared at my phone screen, silently hoping everything would go just as I wished. Just a bit of peace, a bit of fairness, and a bit of love for Mark, the little boy I love more than anything in this world. The first few days, everything seemed fairly normal, or at least I kept convincing myself it was. Work at the hospital swept me into a whirlwind of nonstop emergencies, but whenever I had a free moment, I'd call to check on Mark. The first time I called, I heard Jack's laughter echoing through the receiver, cartoon music blaring from the TV in the living room. Then my mother picked up, her voice a bit rushed. "Mark is having a great time with his cousins. Don't worry about a thing. I'm just a little busy." Before I could ask more, she hung up, seeing guests had just arrived. The next night I called again. This time my father answered. He told me he was helping Jack prepare for a basketball tournament, and Emily was asking Grandma to teach her ballet, so Mark is probably playing alone in the room. I waited for Mark to speak up, but all I heard were hurried footsteps, and the call ended quickly after a few polite questions. A vague uneasiness started to creep into my heart, but I pushed it away, thinking maybe I was just overly anxious about being away from my son for the first time. Mark will be fine. I have to believe that, I told myself. On the third night, Mark called me late, his voice small, as if afraid someone might hear. Mom, I had dinner alone. Grandma, Grandpa, Jack, and Emily went out to eat and told me to stay home because the table was full. I didn't get to watch a movie with them tonight either. They told me I should just go to bed early. But Mom, I miss you. I heard every choked word from my son and my heart broke, but I tried to keep my voice calm and reassuring. Just a few more days and I'll be home, sweetheart. Hang in there. I'll call Grandma and Grandpa in the morning. But after I hung up, I broke down in tears in the staff room, fear and hurt silently swelling inside me. I tried to reach my parents, asking about Mark's daily routine, but was only met with indifference and coldness. Every time I called, there was an excuse: helping Jack with homework, taking Emily to music lessons, hosting Linda's guests. Mark's very well behaved, doesn't bother anyone. You don't need to worry, my mother said, trying to sound soothing, but her voice was rushed and she would hang up quickly. During my brief calls with Mark, I noticed him changing. He spoke less, gave short answers, and no longer excitedly told stories about Grandma, Grandpa, Jack, or Emily. One time he said, "I want you to come get me soon, Mom. It's so boring here." When I asked why, Mark just fell silent. I imagined him sitting quietly in the guest room, hearing laughter from the next room, missing at the dinner table, watching activities from afar, or not being invited at all. One evening I called Linda, hoping she'd offer some care or help for Mark, but she brushed me off. "Sophie, your kid is old enough. Playing by himself is good. Mark has to learn to be independent. I'm busy managing my two. Don't complicate things." Her voice was gentle but icy, cutting off any effort I made. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe everything will be fine. But reality just pushed me further to the margins of my own family. The images I longed for: Grandma reading stories to Mark, taking him to the park, family photos, laughter, all seemed reserved for Jack and Emily. Mark was just a quiet shadow, always standing outside of the fun and attention. One night, Mark texted me, "Mom, I'm in bed, but I can still hear them laughing outside. I want to go home with you." I was speechless, not knowing what to say except to promise I'd pick him up as soon as I could. The feeling of helplessness crept in. The more I tried to trust, the more I realized that the gap in our family wasn't closing at all but growing even wider. Amidst my exhausting workdays, I started to realize maybe I'd never truly belonged in that place, and even worse, neither did Mark. My own son. One late afternoon, as I was about to finish my shift, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. My heart nearly stopped when I heard the voice on the other end. "This is City Child Protective Services. We need to talk to you about your son, Mark." I froze, struggling to stay calm as they continued. "Did you know that Mark was brought to our office this morning? His grandparents left him and did not return." Everything inside me turned to ice. I stammered, "What? No. Where are my parents? Why would they?" But the person on the line just repeated, "We tried to contact other relatives, but no one responded. Mark is very sad and frightened. Can you come right away?" I frantically called my parents, Linda, everyone in my contact list. No one answered. All I got were endless dial tones and text message rejections. In the middle of my panic, I broke down in tears in the staff lounge, not caring about the looks from my colleagues. Inside me, a tidal wave of hurt, anger, helplessness, and suffocating pain crashed over and over. Finally, I found a voicemail from my mother's number. "Sophie, I'm so sorry, but we're too tired and can't look after Mark any longer. We've arranged for him to be temporarily taken care of somewhere safe until you get back. Don't blame us. We'll talk later." I never thought I'd have to answer my son about why his grandparents abandoned him like that. When I arrived at the CPS office, I saw Mark curled up in a corner, red-eyed, clutching the old teddy bear I'd packed for him. He looked at me, his lips trembling. "Mom, why don't Grandma and Grandpa want me to stay with them? Did I do something wrong?" That question cut through me like a knife. I hugged Mark tightly, trying to comfort him. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry. I'm here now." But the truth was, I didn't know what to do or understand how my parents could be so heartless to their own grandchild. In the days that followed, I lived in a state of complete collapse. My mind spun with questions that had no answers. Why did my parents choose to cast off their responsibilities so coldly? How could they so easily leave Mark with strangers while caring for Jack and Emily so meticulously? In Mark's memory, that wound would never fully healed, and for me it was the moment when my already fragile trust was finally crushed. When Mark hugged me, tears streaming down his face, I knew all my efforts to keep the peace or wait for a miracle from my family had ended. All that was left was a raw and painful truth. We had been betrayed by those closest to us. In the days after that ordeal, I felt like I was drifting through my own life. The feeling of being betrayed by those I once thought were my safest refuge left me both furious and shattered. I brought Mark back to our small apartment, where the faint afternoon light crept through the window, casting cold, lonely streaks across the wall. Everything around me felt like it was collapsing with a weight I couldn't measure, and Mark, already a sensitive child, casting me but watched my son sit silently for hours by the window, eyes following the neighborhood kids playing outside, too afraid to step out and join them. At night, Mark would often jolt awake from nightmares, sweating, clutching me tightly and whispering, "Mom, I'm scared Grandma and Grandpa don't love me anymore. If I disappeared, would you come look for me?" My heart twisted painfully. All I could do was hold him tight, comforting him with everything I had left, but somewhere inside, a quiet anger and helplessness still burned. I called my parents many times, but every time it was the indifferent voice of the voicemail, or sometimes a cold message from my mother. "Sorry, your father and I need time to rest. Please understand. We'll talk when the family is better." Linda didn't send anything but empty, polite phrases, even avoided me when I went to her house. My family, already so fragile, now completely slammed the door shut on the two of us, leaving only meaningless pleas for understanding, and a wall of indifference I could never break through. I tried to maintain every little routine for Mark, still cooking his favorite dishes, still telling him bedtime stories, still holding his hand every morning as I walked him to school. But Mark's eyes grew quieter, more distant with each passing day. I took him to see a therapist, but Mark just sat in silence, avoiding adult eyes, shaking his head at any question about his grandparents or family. Beside him, an emptiness had formed, a silent wound that, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fill with hugs or comforting words. Some nights I stayed up until morning, sitting in front of an old family photo taken on a distant Christmas. In the picture, everyone was smiling. I was holding Mark in my arms while my parents, Linda, Jack, and Emily, gathered close. I wondered if those smiles had ever been real, or just a facade I never had the courage to look at honestly. I tormented myself for trusting too much, for believing that if I just kept enduring, if Mark was just good and obedient enough, every distance would disappear. But I was wrong, and the price I had to pay was my son's tears. The more I tried to hold on to hope of mending things, the more isolated I felt from everything. No relatives, no explanations, not a single genuine apology. Just me, facing emptiness and the pain every time Mark whispered, "Mom, I don't want to see Grandma and Grandpa." The fragments of what once felt like a perfect home shattered day by day as Mark grew up in silence. I was angry at my family, angry at myself, and even deeper was a fear that this wound would follow Mark for the rest of his life, and that I would never again be able to trust in family love. One morning in the middle of summer, while I was still fumbling to prepare breakfast for Mark, my phone suddenly buzzed. It was a message from Emma, my best friend from college and the only person I truly trusted with everything. "Sophie, have you seen your mom's Facebook?" That brief message made me freeze, my heart suddenly seized by a vague dread. My hands shook as I opened Facebook, my heart pounding as I saw the highlighted status at the top of my mother's page. "Hawaii is amazing. Family together, the grandkids having the time of their lives by the blue sea and golden sun. Thank you, Linda, for the perfect plan." Below were rows of photos of my parents beaming, arms around Linda, Jack, and Emily on a white sandy beach, glasses of cocktails under palm trees, and a stream of congratulatory comments about a dream vacation. I felt dizzy. I scrolled through every photo, every word, feeling my heart tighten with the sense of being betrayed all over again. So while Mark was left alone in a strange place, my family was not unwell or too tired, as my mother had said. They had planned to go to Hawaii to enjoy happiness with Linda and her kids. Every word before had just been a cruel excuse to abandon their responsibility to Deep inside, I felt both devastated and as if I'd finally woken up from a long, tear-filled dream. No longer hesitating, I took the initiative to contact the CPS worker who had handled Mark's case. During the call, my voice trembled as I asked, "What did my parents say when they left Mark here?" The worker sighed and recounted, "They said they couldn't reach you, that you'd be gone for a long time and no one could care for Mark except us. But we still felt something was off because Mark kept saying he missed you and waited every day for you to come back." Hearing those words, I felt a surge of pain and anger. I realized it wasn't just me. Even the social workers saw through the coldness and lies behind my family's facade. While I was still wrestling with my emotions, Aunt Carol, my father's younger sister, called unexpectedly. She usually lived far away and rarely kept in touch, but this time, her voice was filled with worry and compassion. "Sophie, I've heard everything. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you sooner. I just spoke with your mother on the phone. They were bragging about their Hawaii trip like nothing serious had happened." My. Aunt Carol told me more about that conversation. My mom and Linda had planned the Hawaii trip in advance, intentionally hiding it from me, using exhaustion as an excuse to leave Mark behind, and even telling the whole family, "Sophie is too sensitive. Don't interfere in her family matters." Aunt Carol didn't just comfort me, she was firm. "You need to stand up for yourself and for Mark. Family isn't just about blood. It's about those who truly love and cherish you. If you need evidence or a witness, I'm ready. Don't let them keep lying and hurting the two of you any longer." The truth was out, and though the pain was still raw, I felt a new strength growing inside me. For the first time after all these years of enduring, I wasn't alone. I had Emma, Aunt Carol, and even the social workers who understood and were ready to support us. The urge to fight back, to protect Mark and my own worth, surged within me stronger than ever. In Mark's eyes, though still clouded with sadness, I saw a glimmer of hope. I squeezed his hand tightly, silently promising, "I won't let anyone hurt you again. It's time for us to face the truth and reclaim justice for ourselves." After days of gathering all the evidence, I knew I could no longer remain silent. Images of Mark flashed through my mind, his sad eyes, the nightmares, the haunting questions. Why am I not loved like Jack and Emily? I didn't want to run anymore, didn't want to be the weak peacemaker. With Aunt Carol and Emma's support, I arranged a video call, inviting my parents, Linda, and other close relatives, and I notified the CPS worker to join as a witness if needed. When the screen filled with familiar faces, I struggled to keep my voice calm, though my heart raged. My father appeared first, eyes avoiding mine. My mother sat beside him, holding her tea as if at a dull meeting. Linda was behind them, looking annoyed. Without waiting for them to speak, I immediately pulled up screenshots of my mother's Facebook posts about Hawaii, along with her cold message. "We just couldn't take care of him," and my voice grew heavy. "Mom? Dad? Why did you choose to leave Mark with strangers just so you could vacation with Linda and her kids? Why did you lie to CPS and say you couldn't reach me?" The air was dead silent. Linda gave a dismissive smirk, trying to change the subject. "Sophie, you're blowing this all out of proportion, again. Everyone needs a break after everything we've done." But I didn't back down. I read each message aloud, brought up the plane ticket that had been booked a month in advance, lined it up with the date Mark was dropped at CPS, then turned to my mother. "You wrote that you were exhausted, but posted photos drinking cocktails in Hawaii on the exact same day. How do you explain that?" My father fumbled for an excuse. "We're only human, Sophie. We just didn't have the strength to look after Mark for that long." But I didn't let him finish, cutting him off, my voice firmer than ever. "Not enough strength, or not enough love? If it were Jack or Emily, you would never have done this. The truth is, Mark is just the extra grandchild, and I, no matter how hard I tried, was never truly valued. Everything you did was just for your own convenience, never caring about anyone else's pain." Aunt Carol spoke up, firmly supporting me. "You can't just ignore this and blame Sophie when she and Mark have suffered so much. I've witnessed everything, and if needed, I'm ready to testify for Sophie and Mark." The family atmosphere grew suffocatingly tense. My parents and Linda started making excuses, saying it was just a communication error. They couldn't have blamed me for making things more complicated. But this time, I didn't stay silent. Didn't let myself be emotionally manipulated anymore. I calmly announced, "I have contacted a lawyer and Child Protective Services. All evidence of abandonment, lies, and what happened to Mark has been documented. I am formally requesting legal protection for Mark and cutting off all unnecessary contact with the family. This entire incident will be fully reported." I saw my mother reel in shock, my father sigh in defeat, Linda grow angry but unable to justify anything further. Even relatives who once defended my parents fell silent in the face of the undeniable truth. Emma and Aunt Carol encouraged me not to back down. News of the incident spread quickly through the small community where my family lived. Many people sent messages of sympathy and support, and some who once admired our model family even spoke out against my parents and Linda's heartless actions. In that moment, I no longer felt weak or small. I had stood up, not just for myself, but for Mark, so that he would understand, even in betrayal, we can still fight for justice, still redefine our own worth and place in this life. That confrontation created fractures in my family that could never be healed. But from those cracks, something miraculous began to grow. After that tearful, brutally honest video call, I took the initiative to cut off all contact with my parents and Linda. No more hopeful calls ending in disappointment. No more awkward family gatherings where Mark was just a shadow. For the first time in my life, I felt no guilt or fear of overreacting, because I finally understood that silence and endurance only prolonged the pain, for both me and my son. Aunt Carol continued to support us through every legal procedure, working with CPS to protect Mark's rights, and helping me prove that my former family was no longer a safe environment. Emma was there for every important moment, from the first hearing to psychological counseling sessions for Mark, and surprisingly, once I spoke out, not just one but many relatives in the family began to show empathy. A few called to check on us, to ask to meet Mark, hoping to make up for the affection he'd been denied. In the community, news of my actions spread quickly. Many people who once thought my family was a model began to reconsider the true value of honesty, compassion, and the courage to stand up for oneself. I received countless messages from single mothers and from people who had once been abandoned as children, all of them thanking me for inspiring them not to remain silent in the face of injustice, no matter who it's coming from. After a long period of therapy, Mark gradually regained his trust in adults. He started to open up more during counseling sessions, bravely expressing his fears, his anger, and even his simple wish, "I just want to be with people who truly love me." I no longer forced him to love anyone just because of blood ties. Instead, I focused on building a small world for Mark, one that was full of safety, acceptance, and unconditional love. Together, we planned outings, cooked dinner, filled the living room with paintings, and cherished each moment of healing that, while seemingly small, changed our entire future. One day, when I asked Mark if he wanted to write a letter to his grandparents, he just shook his head and smiled gently. "I'm not sad anymore, Mom. Being here with you is enough." I knew then that the peace I had longed for was finally shining in his eyes, and for myself, too. I stopped blaming, stopped waiting for others to love me the way I deserved. I learned that growing up sometimes means daring to say no and building your own home with courage and self. My old family gradually became strangers, but in return, I gained a new family. Mark, Emma, Aunt Carol, and all the small but warm embraces that together built happiness out of old broken pieces. I returned to work with a stronger spirit, no longer afraid of anyone judging me or putting me in second place in any story. I lived true to myself, believed in the journey I had overcome. If you've ever been excluded, ever felt like an outsider in your own home, remember, you're not invisible, you're just standing in the wrong place. True family is not only where we are born, but where we are chosen, where we can begin again and love once more. Never let anyone decide your worth, or your child's. Be brave enough to stand up, protect yourself, and please share your story in the comments below, because maybe your experience will be the healing inspiration someone else needs. Thank you for staying with me and Mark until the end of this journey. If you see yourself in this story, leave a comment, share, or simply hit subscribe, so that none of us are ever alone on the path to finding true love again.